What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my fantabulous co-host Grant Hughes, because I am joined by the equally fantabulous Adam Spinella, who just runs the Box and One, the Substack, the YouTube channel. Follow him and them. It's on Twitter at the Box and One. That's at THEBOXANDONE_ at the Box and One _ on Twitter. So much draft content he puts out. One of the best in the business. Longtime friend and guest of this podcast. And it is that time of year again where we pump him for information here. And I am so excited. In honor of Spins, I'm wearing the HardwoodKnocks Fueled by Caffeine and Protected Draft Picks shirt. So top 55 protected draft picks. It's like semi-topical. So I put that on. It's wrinkled. It was just for you. I was literally meeting a deadline. I threw this on just for you. I am excited, but first and foremost, the most important question I will ask you, how the heck are you?
Dan, I'm tired. I don't know about you, man, but like this draft cycle in June and how all of the film that goes into getting to the finish line here, like it tires you out. You add on top of that, I'm just at the end of the school year for my day job. There's apparently like a thick layer of haze in the air and my eyes can't open today. Like the world might be ending. It might not be. Either way, like I'm better than I'm saying, but I'm damn tired, man. I just want to watch a couple more weeks of good basketball and go to sleep.
I feel for you this time of year. I hope you're able to rest soon. I'm sure the air quality out my window, it's like yellow now. It's like, if anyone's ever seen Harry Potter, it's like a basilisk's eyes outside. That's the level of air quality at the moment. So I hope you're staying safe as well, but I would love for you to get some sleep soon. I know this is a busy time of year for you, which is why I mega appreciate you hopping on the podcast for the annual Mega Primer. However, before we jumped on, and the reason we didn't jump on sooner, I wanted to ask you about this. Chris Haynes, my colleague at Bleacher Report, reported that the Suns are waiving Chris Paul. He had a $15.8 million guarantee on his $30.8 million salary. So they're saving immediately $15 million off the top. The nuances of this, I still have not seen. From what I've heard, he's not going back to the Suns. That is like loosely sourced that he's not going back to the Suns. However, we've yet to, Brian Windhorst of the Hoop Collective noted that before this happened, by the way, it's like a couple days ago, that the Suns could waive Chris Paul, then bring him back at a smaller number to give themselves more flexibility under the second luxury tax apron, which if you've listened to this podcast, we did the CBA FAQ, like go back and listen to that. It's a disaster. I can't believe the players union agreed to that. Neither here nor there. That they cannot do that though if they stretch him, which you would stretch him and waive that $15 million over 3 years. So that'd be $5 million a season. You could technically get to cap space if you dumped DeAndre Ayton somewhere, but you do that if you have something bigger up your sleeve. And the fact that it seems like CP3 isn't going back to Phoenix, if all they do is just eat his $15.8 million thing, I don't know. Yeah, you have some extra wiggle room to access the mid-level exception, but it doesn't really portend this massive move. It gives you some more trade flexibility with money that you can take back. Were you one, surprised by this? And two, do you think it's like, I can't even ask you if you think it's the right move. It's just, you only make this decision if you have something much bigger in mind, correct?
You would think, Dan. And again, I'm not so sure exactly like what is going on with this entire Chris Paul thing. But the way that I view this is from Phoenix is you either think that you have to make some sort of a move or a change now to appease the guys in the locker room, or that it just was come to the best decision here was for both sides to part. And to me, that's where this comes from. It's less about, shouldn't say it's less about, it is important, the on-court stuff, but a lot of times these decisions are made just because of maybe some of the off-court things. Both sides agree that it's just time to kind of move on, that this may not just be driven by the Phoenix Suns here, that there may be an element of Chris Paul wanting to find a new location as well.
And you pointed me to this in the chat. Thank you. That Shams tweeted, the Suns and Chris Paul are exploring multiple options, which include a trade, stretching his contract, or waiving and re-signing him in free agency. So don't ever trust me with my source information saying that Chris Paul's gone. I will say it's weird that that's coming out now. And Haynes did have in his follow-up tweet that Chris Paul wants to play several more years and looks forward to playing for a contender. I guess that infers Phoenix is part of the equation, but wild stuff. I'm with you on everything you said. If he's going back, it still probably means the Suns have some other things up their sleeves. It's just not as big. And I actually think I would have bet before like the follow-up tweet and before I heard what I had heard that he would go back, and that's what they were doing, because it just doesn't, I don't know what else they could actually do.
Right.
But I would say very quickly, if he had to go somewhere, I think the teams that are probably going to be mentioned most, and I think I'd support all of them, the Clippers, who can only give him the minimum, though. He would technically be getting paid $15.8 million already. The Lakers, who could give him part of the mid-level exception or all of it if they wanted to. The Celtics, I think he'd make some sense for. Like, they need a primary offensive organizer, and I think he would help with a lot of their, like, when things slow down and they get too easily nudged out of their process and they commit all these turnovers and they're not taking the right shots. He would help with that. I think he would help. And my favorite destination, which I don't think would be feasible, but it makes so much sense, Milwaukee. They would only be able to offer him the minimum if both Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez are coming back. I would love to see it. Imagine a closing lineup of Drew, CP3, Brolo, Middleton, and Giannis.
Yikes.
Oof. That's where I'm at. So I'll have more on this maybe when something actually happens. But CP3 was waived, but he might still be a member of the Phoenix Suns. It's all very awkward and weird at the moment.
We have no idea what to make of any of that, Dan.
We do know, though, that the NBA draft is coming up on June 22nd, which, again, wild time of year for Coach Spins over here. I will be working in, thank you, everyone in our Discord for questions. I'll be doing something different and working them in as we go for the most part, just to try and avoid like repetition later on and just for a nice change of pace. So our first question comes from Unbiased Pistons fan. Is also a question that I ask you every single year. What is your draft philosophy on drafting for fit versus drafting for best player available?
Yeah, I think it's an important question for all scouts to be able to nail down their philosophy on this. I kind of think it depends on two things. The first is where you're drafting, and the second is what your team situation is. So the higher in the draft you are, the more you have to take best player available. As you get down towards the end of the lottery, in the middle part of the first round, fit factors in a little more. And then end of the first round, second round, like it's just guys who you think fit your organization and or it's the right time to take an upside swing. And that goes a little bit more to the second point of you got to know where you're at with your team. If you have the foundational pieces to your team already in place, you probably need to start thinking about fit a little bit more in that conversation instead of just adding more cooks into the kitchen. So it's a fancy way of saying it depends, but I think those are the things that it most clearly depends on. There are some teams that, might have a higher stomach for taking that upside pick and not going with best player available just because they have such a good roster right now. We've seen that with Golden State the last couple of years in their draft philosophy. They have taken best player available over fit. Is that wrong? I don't necessarily know, but I do think it depends on both your team situation and where you're drafting.
Is there like a ballpark number in the draft where it's okay, now you kind of can deviate from best player available and prioritize, but is it like number 8 and beyond after the lottery, whatever?
Yeah, I think it's going to change slightly based on each draft. Depends on how many really high upside guys there are in each class. Like I think as you get to the end part of the lottery, you're starting to think more about fit and about like the highest available role players. And then, there's a common theory out there. John Hollinger over at The Athletic started this. About 20 to 23 guys in each draft class end up making it. So when you get to the later part of the first round, like it's an either or. You can really make the highest upside swing and just go for that type of guy, or you can see if you hit on a role player that might have a higher propensity to help you right away.
I prefer always going. When I'm looking at contenders in their drafting, I'm always saying they should go for fit. But if I was running a front office, I would always go best player available. And if I was drafting past a certain range or tier in that draft class, I would just be taking the most mind-melting swings that you could imagine. Which is probably why I don't run a front office, but that would be how I would personally look at it.
Yeah, there are some teams who, when they draft, particularly in the early part of the second round, like they just go after those high volume swings guys. Like if one of the 10 hits, it ends up being a huge star turn and a great return for what they've put in equity wise. So there are teams that do that. It's not wild.
What is one thing either about covering the draft or about this specific draft class that you wish dipshit podcast hosts like myself would ask you about, but never do.
No, you are not a dipshit, Daniel. I don't know if there is one question that I wish I got a little bit more. Like I think the draft audience in general is a pretty well educated one. They think philosophically. They have conversations about things like best player available or fit for teams. Those are really good starting points. Maybe if there was one thing that I wish got asked more, was trying to normalize including high school context into the conversation, particularly with a lot of these one and done players, that people just look at their last stop, that 1 year when they were in college or wherever they were before the draft, and say, well, this is the player that he is neatly in a box. If he can't do things that we've seen during this year, then he never did them before. And that's very much not the case. So I just wish there was probably a little bit more acknowledgement that there's stuff beyond college that needs to be analyzed.
I don't know that I could ever evaluate high school prospects because I feel like when you see people talking about like freshmen or something, it just feels a little cringy at that point where it's like, oh, that person's 14 or 15 years old. And I don't know how you criticize from afar, like a 30,000 foot, he's like a 14 or 15-year-old. But that's a great point, especially because, and as you mentioned, and we're firmly into this, it's not like this is new, but
Right.
the college sample is just so small now because of the one and done era. And so you're not having 2, 3, 4-year college sample size for most of these guys. Why wouldn't you harken back to, where they actually spent more of their time to this point?
Right. No doubt about it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I didn't include this on the outline, but I had heard you say it in, written and say it a few times, questions about how to evaluate the prospects that are coming out of Overtime Elite. What has made that so challenging, or just what are your biggest concerns about how that's being run, or even just your unknowns there?
Yeah, I don't think it's being run in an irresponsible way in any regard. I just think that it's really tough to create a program that splits two different pathways. One is preparing players for professional basketball, and the other is providing them a training development ground that prepares them for college. Those are two drastically different processes that players have to go through about recruitment, about getting ready for the draft, things like that. And it's hard to square the talent level in some regard. You know that these are really highly talented young kids, and almost every game is like an all-star game. So you're not going to necessarily see the type of dominance that you would. But if you know anything about high school basketball, it's that shooting is at a premium even more than it is in college, even more than it is in the NBA. So these games are not very well spaced on the offensive or defensive ends of the floor. There just aren't enough shooters that are out there, particularly when OTE is going out and getting a lot of just good athletes that they can work with. So I just don't know what to trust in the product and what we're seeing. Is it just these Thompson twins and the guys at the top of this draft class are so dominant next to their competition, and they're all talented high school kids that are going to be pros someday anyway? Like, we should really value that? Or are they playing down to the level a little bit?
It is not even something I gave consideration to until I had saw that you or heard you say that. And I think it's fair to actually look at it that way. I feel stupid asking you about Victor Wembanyama just because I feel like he's been talked about to death and we know where he's going, but it's also like we can't marginalize Spurs fans. And he's really fun. He's probably he's probably the prospect that I've watched the least over the past, few weeks as I've tried to draft prep, because I've seen the highlights. I've seen what people have said and written about him. Just resigned. This guy is going to be incredible. But do you have any just general thoughts or impressions about this level of transcendence that he's going to bring to the game?
He's a fucking freak, Dan. Like, this guy is insane as a basketball player. 7'4" with a nearly 8-foot wingspan. He changes the geometry of the court when he's on it, on both ends. He's such a massive lob threat that anytime he rolls near the basket without the basketball, you have to collapse on him even before he catches it. And it just changes the type of plays that are available for his team on offense. He's unguardable in turnaround jump shots or pull-up jumpers, because how can you contest a shot that's released as high as his is? Defensively, with his rim protection skills, how he guards on the perimeter and can move his hips, he prevents people from wanting to take layups or even pull up jumpers anywhere near him. I've never seen anything like it before. He's a freak. The best comparison point, and I hope that they show this on ESPN on draft day when they have those god-awful player comparisons, they should put like the Monstars from Space Jam up there, because that's the closest thing I've ever seen on film to what Victor Wembanyama is on a basketball court.
Let's start here. What's the thing he does now that you think is going to translate the most as a rookie for him?
Rim protection, his ground coverage and just ability to block and alter shots near the basket. He's not a guy that's going to be in trouble because of the defensive 3 seconds calls. Like, he can cover ground and stay outside the lane and then get to the basket, the other side of the rim, whatever he needs, really quickly.
And what thing do you think he's going to need to work on the most, or that he'll struggle with the most moving to the next level?
So for me, there's just something that comes with being his size that you have to kind of compensate for, right? There's no way to avoid the weaknesses or the challenges that come with being 7'4". One of them is that he has a really high dribble. He just can't get lower to the ground. It's not physically possible for him.
He'd hurt his back if he tried to, probably. Yeah.
He would just collapse like a house of cards. Like, he's not built to be able to do something like that. So there are going to be challenges with how early he needs to make passing reads as a result of that. He's not going to be a much quicker twitch ball handler. Like, he can tighten some things, but that's not what the recipe is for him. It's making faster decisions because there's so much time that goes between one dribble and the next. Like, there are smaller things that he needs to clean up in that regard, but don't buy into the whole just throw a bunch of weight on his frame argument and he's too skinny. Like, his body has been carefully crafted and developed to avoid injury. Mm-hmm. Just throwing a bunch of weight on his frame could throw that out of balance.
I feel that was covered in at least one of those ESPN profiles that they did on him. And it seems really smart. Like, they're making sure he gets, like, I don't know, 25 hours of sleep a day or whatever it is. And to frame it as, it's not about having him put on all this weight, which is going to put more strain on him and then change the dynamics of how he plays. But it's just about making sure that he properly grows in to his body and is healthy. And you can get stronger without having to get, like, absolutely massive. And do you buy into any of the concerns, though, people have about his frame? Or am I can't do it. And I don't know if I'm just hardened to, like, all right, Kevin Durant exists and he's been pretty good for a long time. Like, why do we need to do this?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about it at all. I don't lend much credence to it. And I think it's also unfair, and that's not to call out some casual fans or necessarily individuals who are out there. This is more of a blanket statement. Like, it feels like a lot of the conversation around this is almost rooting for him to get injured to play the I told you so game. And I can't stand that. Like, I don't think you root for anybody to get injured. It's not something you can always predict. Like, there's a higher predictability with guys who are closer to his frame, but it's not something you really can reliably predict. So I'm just not there on that conversation.
We have a question from Muckle in the Discord that I actually thought was fascinating, and I paraphrased it because it was like 200 words long, and it was very thorough. I appreciate it. But Muckle says the Cavs ran into problems building around LeBron the first time around when he was so good so fast. The Mavs are running into the same issue with Luka, and have run into before now with the same issue with Luka. Is there a chance Wembanyama is so good it accelerates the Spurs' timeline and potentially complicates their future? Or do we just trust them to take the longer view relative to those other high-profile situations? And a brief shout-out to Glad in our Discord. I'm not reading your response because that was like, I read it. I'm not going to read it out loud. It was like 500 to 750 words. Very well thought out. But I'm just curious where you land on the thoughts from Muckle Spins.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if I necessarily agree. Like, I think that there were individual missteps at both situations for Cleveland and for Dallas in those examples.
Dallas hasn't handled it well? That's shocking.
Right. Exactly. So, like, it's hard for me to say that it's a philosophical issue more than it is just an execution one. I think the only difference philosophically that I would find that actually gives me a lot of hope for the Spurs is that they already seem to have the young blueprints of the roster in place and already on it, with guys like Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell. And, I like Jeremy Sohan quite a bit as a fit next to Victor Wembanyama.
Him and Devin Vassell are like two of my favorite young players in the league. So good.
Yeah. So I think because San Antonio already has those pieces on the table, that's different than what, Luka was walking into in Dallas or what LeBron was getting drafted into in Cleveland. Slight differences. I don't really know how much to say other than that.
Where I land on this, for anyone who cares, I would trust the Spurs more than those other organizations, just given specifically relative to Dallas, which has always sort of tried to find those insta fixes or remain relevant in free agent. The Spurs have very much, with the Kawhi trade stuff aside, that was very weird. Like, they've always tried to build gradually, at least over the past 3 decades or whatever. And so I would trust that they're more equipped, especially with the asset base and youth base they already have in place, to navigate this gradually and effectively. But what I will say, which is a big question mark, forget about how flexible their cap situation is, forget about their assets, forget about all the promising young players. I just wonder if, similar to how LeBron brought a pressure to Cleveland, unlike anything they've ever seen before, and how Luka did the same to Dallas, will Wemby do the same to San Antonio, where it's not something, because he's so good so quickly, that they don't necessarily like. It was different when Tim Duncan had his ascent. Like, it was a different time. And so I'm just wondering if there could be a curveball thrown in there. I default to no, because I trust the Spurs. And I do think teams in general lose sight of the fact, because of how restricted free agency works, you have at minimum, a 7-year timeline with these guys. It's normally 7 to 9, but unless you're going to acquiesce to a trade demand, you have 7 to 9 years to figure this out. And so they should be fine. But I'm so excited to see him play next season. And the NBA did a good job at making sure the fans were exposed to him this year. Mm-hmm. But I still didn't see a ton of him. I just can't wait to see him next season. I want them to take care of his body. I want them to bring him along as effectively as possible, but I am hoping that they just let her rip with him, where it's he's just given agency over the offense, and we get the full Victor Wembanyama experience.
We very, very, very well might, Dan, because he's pretty damn good at basketball, and what he's been able to do just as a number one option for that Metropolitans team. It's been amazing to watch this year. His growth just as a number one option on offense is really, really rapid.
I do know where you land on this, but for our listeners that may not, where do you land on the Scoot Henderson versus Brandon Miller debate? And is there a determining factor that swings it for you, or are they just not even in the same necessarily tier for you?
I think they are in a little bit separate of a tier, but it is something identifiable that separates them for me. I am a Scoot Henderson guy. I've had him number 2 this entire draft cycle, and a lot of it comes down to the context. What he's been able to do as a 2-year teenager playing against professionals in the G League Ignite, that level of volume, production, and efficiency from a teenager in a professional league, it's only been done by guys who translate into being the best of the best at the NBA. That's the Luka Doncic's of the world. So I am all in on Scoot Henderson. I think he's going to be an absolute star, but beyond the on-court stuff, he has the intangibles. He has those it factors, the ability to take over a game and make the right decisions, competitive spirit, a desire to lead a locker room. He's just the guy that I would want to hand the keys to the franchise to, more so than Brandon Miller. It's not disrespect to Miller's game necessarily. I think there are a couple more questions about his game that I have than Scoot's in terms of translatability and success. Mm-hmm. But it's all the off-court stuff that just leads me to believe Scoot is head and shoulders above anybody else.
Would you have any concern? And we already said that if you're running these teams this high, you go best player available. But are there any concerns about how Scoot might, let's use the Charlotte Hornets as an example. Is there any concern about how he might fit with LaMelo Ball, because he is such that it guy? And LaMelo Ball is probably a bad example, because knowing what I know about Scoot and then knowing extensively about LaMelo Ball, I have zero concerns about it. I'm just do it if I'm Charlotte. It's probably what I think is what I would maybe do. But do you have any concerns about how he might fit alongside, let's say, a co-alpha, or however you want to frame it?
I think Scoot has the unselfishness to be able to make that work. And he showed it a year ago playing for the G League Ignite, his first season down there, sharing reps with Dyson Daniels and Jaden Hardy and trying to put everybody in a position to succeed, where he was playing not to his optimal usage. He showed that optimal usage this year, and I still think that's the best way to utilize Scoot. But to me, this is more about LaMelo Ball's ability to accept Scoot Henderson into the fold than it is Scoot's to be able to play with LaMelo. Scoot is going to come in and demand that number one kind of spot, just in terms of a personality type of thing. And if LaMelo still wants the ball and shots and the role where he's got the ball in his hands every single time, I think there could be some challenges.
So once we move the draft, technically, I guess the draft, it starts at 2, because who are you going to take? But there's a consensus top 3 pretty firmly. Who is your 4th guy?
I like Emoni Thompson a lot from the Overtime Elite program. We've talked about best player available quite a few times here on the podcast. And I think what you draft for is not just the guy who is currently the best player available, but who has the highest ceiling to turn into one. And I think undoubtedly Emoni Thompson has the highest ceiling to turn into a guy in this league. Transcendent athlete, unbelievable first step from a standstill, great finisher above the rim. He combines that burst with the ability to make the right and perfect decision when he gets to the basket. He's an automatic paint touch who exploits defenses that collapse on him. If they don't collapse too much, he scores and finishes. If they do too much, he's an unbelievable passer with a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan to throw darts above the level of the defense. The concern with Emoni is his jump shot. He is a jump shot away and a consistent jump shot away from being just such an impactful, unbelievable force on offense, not to mention the athletic defensive tools that he has. Like, he's far and away my number 4 right now.
We did have a question from Cosmic Raccoon, which I weaved in here because I knew that you were going to have Emoni Thompson, number 4. Cosmic Raccoon says, my question is, why is Emoni considered such a consensus top 4 pick when he's a 20-year-old guy with massive holes in his game who's coming out of a league with extremely bad competition? I get he's super athletic, but you put him in Whitmore or Black's tough situations, and the more half-court oriented college game on a team without spacing would have absolutely exposed him, and he would have tumbled down draft boards all year. What is the rebuke to that? And when you say a jump shot away, are we talking like Ben Simmons is a jump shot away, or is he's much closer to that?
Yeah, he's a little closer than Ben, not by too much. It's still a pretty broken jump shot, but here's the thing I'd say to that question. The difference, and I think this is where the draft community that has Emoni Thompson listed so high is kind of in agreement here. The difference is in that high-end outcome that these guys can continue to get to. Like, the ceiling, so to speak, for Emoni Thompson is so much higher than some of the other guys that are mentioned. It's a questionable route, and I think that there are a lot of teams and general managers, decision makers, who at the end of the day might be too hesitant to pull the trigger. But based on kind of the clips and the upside and what you're just watching on film, that upside is so enormous with Emoni in ways that it just isn't with other guys.
This is one of my favorite, as every year I picked my favorite draft prospects I'm most intrigued by. Anthony Black has caught my attention in large part because of you, by the way. Do you see his offensive utility translating immediately, or will he struggle if he's not a better shooter or just in general a better creator for himself?
Yeah, I love Anthony Black, another intangibles hero to me, and a guy I've fallen in love with. I think he's borderline basketball genius, one of the smartest passers that I've seen. And he's a physical athlete and can get downhill and live at the lane. So when you combine paint touches with great passing and IQ, the results tend to be pretty good. So I know the jump shot is a worry. I don't think it's going to be what determines whether he's impactful in the NBA. I think it does determine what role he's in, because his mechanics are so set and stiff that it's basically a catch and shoot jump shot where he's very set. And that doesn't translate well to dribble pull-ups a lot of the time. So it may push him to fewer pick and roll reps, which I think is the optimal way for him to use his passing ability. But he's going to be impactful regardless. And that's part of the reason why I'm so high on him. Like, every other box is checked and checked so thoroughly. It's just hard to not see him being an impactful NBA player.
Something that like sent me in a good, you called him the best perimeter defender in this draft. What makes him that?
He's 6'7" and really long. He loves to get up into guys. He's super, super smart and loves to pressure, quick hands, and does all those things above the 3-point line. But he's a pristine help defender, knows exactly where to be and when to gamble. I think a lot of times guys who have these natural athletic tools develop some poor habits at times by just trying to gamble for steals too much, and they get caught out of position. Black does not gamble very frequently. He wins when he does, and he knows he's just got an unbelievable feel to know when he's going to try to be exploited for something, and he locks those down really quickly.
And you mentioned the passing, and I know he's billed as this 6'7" point guard, but given the shooting limitations or even, self-creation limitations, is he somebody who can be used as more of a screener, and then you can utilize his playmaking in that regard can he do anything off the short roll, or no, it very much has to be that playmaking is going to manifest best with the ball in his hands, or exclusively with the ball in his hands even?
Yeah, I think there is some short roll upside, but I think of him more like you think of a Josh Giddey, right? Like it's a lot of face up creation. Yeah, I think that's I'm not a big comparison guy. I think it's the devil's work. But
Mhm.
if I had to compare,
Yeah,
one
what's
guy
the
to
best
Anthony,
pro comp for Victor Wembanyama?
yeah, right. Yeah, it's all setting guys up for failure. But I think a Josh Giddey type of role is probably the right one for Anthony Black, where you hope the shooting continues to come along, but you just find ways to space the floor, put the ball in his hands, and he's going to make good decisions.
We just need to get him with Fred Vincent or Chip Anglin, and maybe everything will be solved.
It would be great.
I'm wondering if we can go through a couple prospects, and you can give me what you think are the most under discussed talking points for each.
Okay.
And I'm gonna apologize. I practiced the pronunciation today. I tried it with you beforehand. Ausar Thompson. Is that even close?
Sounds great.
I've heard too many variations. But what's the most under discussed talking point with him, in your opinion?
So I have a large gap between Amen and Ausar Thompson on my overall board, and I think that it might continue to grow between now and draft night. Most under-discussed thing about Ausar, he shot 36.7% overall in the half court this year. That's a really low rate when you're talking about a guy who is supposed to be a dominating athlete at that level. I think that his just overall ability to put the ball in the basket needs to be examined a lot more than it is right now.
Same question for you about Jarace Walker.
Oh, Jarace. I love Jarace. He's another guy who's actually growing on me in this draft class. Rim deterrence as a help defender. We don't talk about rim deterrence a lot for guys that aren't like 7'8" and Rudy Gobert, but it's really important to be positionally sound on time and early to take away field goal attempts near the basket. That's an underrated part of what Jarace Walker brings to the table. Yes, he blocks a lot of shots. He's a pretty good help defender with all of the highlights that you see, but he prevents other field goal attempts from even going up by rotating and knowing where to be on time. Huge crush on him from a coaching standpoint. I really like his help D.
What about, and he seems like he might be one of the more, or if not the most controversial lottery prospect, Gradey Dick.
Yeah, Grady's a tough one for a lot of people. For me, it's that he's known as a shooter. That's going to be his role. But for such a good shooter, he can't really create his own when he's run off the line, particularly if he's going left. Like, he's got a one dribble pull up to his right, but the misses and the results that he gets when trying to come off of screens and he can't get a shot right away, they're not fantastic.
I watched a lot of him because we had a question on him in one of our mailbags the other day, and there were a lot of defensive concerns, and you had called him, I think it was a solid defender within a team construct. And so I'm watching more closely. I definitely see how he can be exploited on the ball, but I feel like some people might be devaluing just how easy it could be to fit him within a larger team dynamic. When you're kind of looking at his rotations, or if he's helping when he's 2 passes away, or like knowing how to make some off-ball plays, it feels like this is someone who might not be as limited on that end of the floor as I feel like he's being painted across a wide variety of, mocks or draft analysis.
Yep. A very good call. I keep calling him a heavily targeted defender, not a poor defender, heavily targeted, because a lot of teams are going to try to go at him on ball, but he's fine rotationally. Like, there are times when he misses the rim, but he also blocks a decent amount of shots for a guy who's a 6'8" skinny shooter. He tries to rotate on time and take charges. He doesn't execute it very well, but like, he tries. There's some instinct in there. I think that the defensive stuff gets picked apart a lot. That's a pretty good call on your part to just kind of bring that up here.
Cason Protein Wallace.
Cason. So the context around the season at Kentucky is really important. He hurt his back midway through the year, and the shooting kind of fell off of a cliff as a result. He was over 40% from 3 before that injury occurred, with a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. I love the toughness of how he decided to play through the season with that back injury, and it clearly hampered him in a lot of different ways. But I don't think we're talking about, when healthy, what you get offensively with Cason Wallace. He's pegged as a defense-first guy, but 40% from 3 with a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, it's pretty special in a guard.
He is like a caps lock defender too. And I know you've really trumpeted that in your analysis. Is that like he's going to come up and that's just someone who's going to be a defensive force for, a wealth or the lion's share of his career?
I think so. I keep calling Cason Wallace. He's Pat Beverly on defense and who Pat Beverly thinks he is on offense.
Ah, that's fantastic. And the final one here, who I know shockingly little about, I'm basically a blank canvas on this player, full disclosure. Cam Whitmore. I know he's in a lot of like top fives
Yep.
or top six, top sevens, but I'm like a blank canvas with him. So what's the most under discussed talking point for him?
That he dunked on my team 3 times last year because I coached against him when he was in high school. But it's true story,
So
unfortunately.
look, if he can, so you're saying that he was able to get to the rim against a spins coach team, which
Yeah.
I would automatically vault him up my draft board for that.
No, that was a pretty easy thing on his part. If I had to find one area for Cam Whitmore that's just under discussed, it's like he's so young in his basketball journey. He's still 18 years old, but the context around injuries that he's dealt with broken thumb this year, missed some time with a sprained ankle that he suffered 7 feet away from me his senior year in high school, and then COVID shortened seasons, other injuries earlier in high school. Like, he just hasn't gotten a ton of playing reps yet. He's 18 with the basketball experience of a 16-year-old, and he's about to head into the NBA and probably going to be able to produce something from day one. So the upside is really through the roof with Cam Whitmore.
You could probably have guessed, since he didn't fall under this umbrella, and I have a specific question about him, or questions, that Taylor Hendricks is another one of my draft obsessions. That obsession intensified after the podcast you did with Basketball She Wrote's Caitlin Cooper on Jarace Walker and Taylor Hendricks. So Taylor Hendricks, I love him. I really want him to go to the Jazz for some reason. But does he have any rise potential? I see him consistently mocked between 7 and 10 or 8 and 10 or whatever. And a lot of people have talked about kind of the lack of upside because of the ball handling, playmaking concerns. Does that actually like prohibit him from being in higher end discussions, or does he have some, not even draft board rise potential, but maybe even, to frame it, a shock and awe potential once he gets to the NBA with that stuff?
I think there's a little bit of draft night rise potential for him, just because I look at Orlando at 6 and Indiana at 7 as teams that he would fit with so well philosophically for what they either typically draft for or what they need right now. So it's more so a fit conversation. I know we hate talking about fit a little bit earlier on the boards, but he's a high enough upside type of guy that it's more about, okay, which high-end prospect is going to be a better fit for what we're trying to build on our organization. That's kind of what I mean with fit, not necessarily he doesn't have the same high ceiling. I think Hendricks' ceiling is super, super high. And that goes to the second part of your question, Dan. Like, there is some room for him to continue to pop. He did more with the ball in his hands at Central Florida that he gets credit for. It didn't look very pretty, but with these college freshmen and these late bloomers through that process, it's really hard to know, are they doing it because they're really comfortable with it and they're just going to be able to show more and more as they get better at it? Or are they just doing it because somebody's trying to allow them to show off all of the skills that they can? And that's not going to be his NBA role. Like, we still don't know the answer to that question.
I would love, or if I was an opposing team, I wouldn't love this, but the idea of him playing with Miles Turner is kind of terrifying. It's like, how do you ever score on the rim against that team? Or like, what do you just punt on rim pressure altogether at that point?
Yeah. And that's a lot of length. It's a lot of length.
And I did. So I just brought it up too. I guess Sam Vecini in his latest mock had him go 6, which I think is the highest I've seen him. Has he gone higher in any other spots that you've seen?
Not that I've seen. I think 6 with Orlando has been about the highest that I've seen. And he and I did a mock draft a couple weeks ago where that's exactly where he took him in our kind of back and forth mock draft version. It was fun.
It's totally off topic, but I feel like there's a chance he could be wasted there. They just have like so many big bodied forwards, and I guess they could all play together. But at that point, I would really, especially if you're adding another limited ball handler creator to the fold, it's like, right, you guys really need to get like in a guard who is more elite than Markelle Fultz and who can space the floor better than Markelle Fultz in there.
It's an interesting fit, but again, it seems to be the type of player the organization has been drawn to in the past.
Yeah, that's for damn sure. And I have faith that I still don't think he can be the alpha creator, but I have not sold any of my Jalen Suggs stock. It is still right there. Thought he had a strong second half of the year. We have this question from Pito, which I thought was a really good one. Every year we see the draft being influenced by how the playoffs developed, at least when you're looking at the conversations. How is this year's draft affected by the current playoffs?
I think you look at the two teams that are in the NBA Finals right now, the Denver Nuggets and Miami Heat, and you have different roster construction lessons that you can take away from them. One of them for Denver is that you can still lean all the way into building the perfect roster construction around your 1 or 2 star players and make it far in the NBA if it's the right version of that. The second lesson that comes from Miami is essentially that shooting is king.
It's the draft doesn't matter. So all these guys are just
shooting is king here, Dan. Like, you need to find guys that space the floor and provide the ability for your best players to get in the lane, who can knock down shots when they're created for them by kickouts from the lane, or make the right decision on the catch to know whether to shoot it, pass it, repenetrate, and then make the next play. And Miami has just a ton of dudes who know how to make that right decision every single time. To me, that's something I've gained a lot, is you look for players who are always smart playing off ball.
The thing I always come back to, and it has nothing to, well, it always has something to do. It's always pertinent. I think it was Bob Myers made the comment that the same type of player who's valuable in the regular season isn't always valuable in the playoffs. And so when you're approaching the draft or free agency or team building, it's how can I most effectively acquire as many players who hold up over the course of those 16 wins that we need when it matters most. And that's something that always comes back to me ever since he said that.
Bingo. It's 100% right. And we've seen different archetypes of players get played off the floor. I'll just give you one example, like Isaac Okoro, Jared Vanderbilt from this year's playoffs. They're really impactful wing defenders in the regular season. Their lack of shooting ultimately catches up to them by the playoffs.
Unbiased Pistons fan, Emoni Bates, flash in the pan, who will only be remembered by his high school mixtape, or an all-star lurking in the second round. In joking, no one between you must stake your claim and you will be held accountable.
Oh, I got to pick one here. Emoni Bates is a difficult one. I think what goes under discussed in this conversation around him is just how many highly touted high school prospects end up not making it to the league or end up not getting drafted. It's a shockingly high number. That this is actually pretty common. It's not a super unique story to a guy like Emoni. It's been more in the mainstream and in the media, so people are following it more. But guys who kind of fall flat from the expectations they had early in their careers is not that uncommon. I still get it and see the upside for a guy like Emoni Bates, but I don't see a lot of the tools that lead me to believe that he's going to overcome kind of the perception in the area that he's at right now. He's got a lot of things that he would need to fix about his game.
Kelsey asks, what are the knocks on Kobi Bufkin? The numbers look good. He has decent size. Why isn't he cracking the top 15? I will say, not everyone knew, or I don't think I even mentioned that you were coming on. So maybe I should have. This was not directed at you because I think he was 15 wasn't Bufkin 15 on your latest big board? So he is in your top 15, if that makes Kelsey feel any better. Spins is all over Bufkin.
Sam Vicini and I both have him in our top 14. I think Vicini might have him at like 9, 10, or 11. I'll probably have him at 14 or 15 come time of the draft. The knock on Bufkin right now is that it's been a really quick ascent during the season from spot up role player, has some skills, to running the offense and doing it at a 50, 40, 90 level. It's a small sample size to trust that he's put it all together in. And I think what we're maybe seeing is just a little bit of hesitance to buy into that small of a sample size and moving a guy super far up our boards.
I rely on you too much. I didn't even know Vicini had him. I just looked. He had him going, I think, 11. Yeah. Bufkin in his latest mock. That is high. So among players we haven't talked about so far, did any of them materially impact their draft stock at the combine first in a good way?
I think the guys who helped themselves the most at the combine this year were those who chose to play. We had 77 invitees to the NBA draft combine this year, and only like 44, 43 of them ended up playing in scrimmages. Just an unbelievably low amount of participation in those games. So the real winners are the ones who bet on themselves competing and won. And those are Olivier Maxence Prosper, who went to Marquette and is a 6'7", 6'8", like defensive-minded long wing who started to turn into a really good catch-and-shoot prospect. Just looked athletically different on the floor and belongs in that first round. The other one is Brandon Pajemski, 6'5" combo guard with unbelievable touch and shooting ability out of Santa Clara. There are some athletic concerns for him, but time and time again, he just pieces it together on offense and finds a way to make so many different positive plays for his team. So those two guys really helped themselves at the combine.
Who, if anyone, hurt themselves at the combine?
I don't know if anybody really hurt themselves at the combine. I think a lot of teams right now are somewhat frustrated with the Brandon Miller situation, particularly in, there's some legal allegations and things going on surrounding him. He's involved in that process and can't really divulge information. So teams that are drafting and, about to hand a multi-million-dollar contract over to a young kid, they can't get the answers that they necessarily need in order to feel comfortable overlooking some things and really drafting him and handing him that contract. So I just think there's some frustration around everything that he's gone through the last several months.
That is, I can't and won't comment on the legal allegations because those are serious. I hate and there's at least a player higher in the draft every year, it feels like, where there's this slander campaign about how poorly his interviews or workouts go. And it just feels like bullshit to me a lot of the time, where there's this information out there because either is a team trying to impact his draft stock, or is it just like a team's mad that they didn't get access. I hate those. We went through it. I think the most notable name recently was Anthony Edwards. Remember, he didn't like basketball and that bullshit. And so I'm just always inherently skeptical and annoyed when, again, just the basketball stuff, not focusing on whatever's happening off the court. I'm always annoyed when it's like, these are just still kids. Like, it just frustrates the hell out of me.
Me too, Dan.
This question, but I tiered it, came from JT Alexander talking about draft sleepers. Who are you much higher on or most higher on relative to the consensus?
The right guy here is probably CD Sissoko. There have been a lot of guys that I end up being higher on early, and then the consensus starts to climb a little bit closer to where I'm at as we get, 2 weeks out from the draft now. CD Sissoko is probably the one guy. There's still a pretty large gap between where I have him and a lot of other mainstream analysts do. I've got a borderline lottery grade on him. Just love the competitive nature, how he defends multiple positions, built like a freaking tank. Like, this guy is thick and strong and uses every inch of his power to his advantage, competes on every possession on defense. And I am a sucker for guys who hit a late growth spurt, but grew up playing the point guard position. And that's what Sissoko is. He ran the point over in Europe before coming to the G League Ignite team this year. I can really see him just being one of those high feel utility wings that makes a really positive impact on both ends.
And who are you most lower on relative to consensus?
Yeah, I would have said Jet Howard. Again, this is starting to fall a little bit closer to where I am in terms of the mainstream. I just never really was that high on the 6'8" shooter out of Michigan. I'm going to go with Ausar Thompson here, because this is one that I'm really struggling to get in on. The lack of productivity in the half court is important to me to be able to focus on. I don't buy the passing ability translating to like a consistent ball in my hands type of role. So he ends up being like a non-shooting, struggle to score connective piece. I just don't think that I would value him as highly as some other people do right now.
Where do you land on? Are you in the middle ground, or are you higher or lower relative to everyone else on Brice Sensabaugh?
I don't know where most people are at with Brice, to be honest. I see a lot of differing opinions on something like him. Like, I think he's a later.
I think I'm in love with him, is basically what I'm getting at. I know the defensive concerns. I just feel like he has it offensively, and I think he might be. You're not drafting him to be your 1A, and it almost feels like he might be better equipped to be the guy who's playing off that guy anyway. And so could he wind up thriving more than people expect? And I understand the defensive concerns, but I kind of look at, because you look at his size, I think the question would be, can he hold up at actual wing spots?
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't have the answer to that, but I would absolutely take a gamble on him potentially being able to down the line.
He's a high upside pick, Dan. And this freshman one and done class is filled with these like high upside, but really questionable in some regard, scoring combos or wings and no one knows which of those players is going to hit, and no one really knows who out of them are going to go first or who's going to go last on draft night. It's a really jumbled group of guys.
I'm laughing right now or smiling because I saw that you provided a response in the document. My question to you was, are there any prospects in particular that you struggled to evaluate or get a grip on leading into this process? And you responded with, yeah, Dan, thanks. Let's talk about who I suck at evaluating. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just, who's giving you the most pause or struggle when you're trying to figure out how they scale to the pro game?
Yeah, we know you didn't mean it, Dan. Wink, wink.
We know that I'm a perennial doubter of your basketball knowledge.
Yeah, I actually just wrote a piece about this, kind of the guys that I'm struggling with most in this draft cycle.
Almost
and
like I read it and decided to ask this question and you were offended by it anyway, but please carry on.
There we go. I think the Thompson twins, we talked about just the frustrations of the overtime elite program and knowing what to translate from that, being a part of this. We can talk about all of those oft injured players in this draft cycle. That's always a challenge to get a grip on, guys who missed a large part of the season due to injury. I think Jalen Hood-Schifino is a sneaky difficult one. And he checks so many boxes that you look for in the modern NBA. 6'6" point guard, really long, defends at the point of attack, unbelievable decision maker with the ball in his hands, really smooth pull-up jumper, just controls the pace of the game. But he has two glaring inefficiencies on the offensive end. I think you can live with one of them. I don't know if he's going to be very impactful if both of them persist. And it's the ability to finish with athleticism at the rim. Very grounded player who had only one dunk in the half court this year. One dunk as a 6'6" primary ball handler. The other thing is he doesn't shoot the ball well as a pull-up guy from three. Very mid-range heavy. And you have to really commit to putting the ball in his hands if you're going to let him play his play style, because he's not a catch-and-shoot threat. There's just a lot of things that need to go right for Hood-Schifino to get the role that allows him to be the best version of himself. That just gives me a lot of pause in the evaluation. I don't know how much role player scalability there is for him.
I first want to applaud you because I'm allowed to ask that I can ask this question. Because the fact that you know so much about the NBA game, like not just the players, but like the team builds, their aims, their front offices, just the transactions, I thoroughly appreciate it. And so I did want to ask you, when you're looking at the circumstances, towards in the lottery, specifically, Orlando, 2 picks in the top 11, a handful of teams in the top 5 might be looking to accelerate timelines, Portland, Houston, Detroit, the quality of teams that we have in the back end, where it's New Orleans and Toronto and Dallas, and then just the overarching parity in the league where I think teams can just talk themselves into being a lot better and more relevant sooner than maybe a couple of years ago, because of how compacted the standings were this season. Do you think there's more potential for trades in this year's lottery, even if they're not necessarily happening on draft night, but it's, we look back and it was July and, the Blazers traded whoever they drafted at number 3?
Yeah, I can see a little bit of movement in there. I understand that there are a few obvious points and teams in that lottery that could be looking to move based on either how things fall or the decisions they make with the direction of their organization. My gut keeps going back to, we kind of hear this year after year, that it's going to be a lot of movement in the draft. Teams are always looking to make this type of deal. And then everyone plays chicken and stays where they're at, takes the guys that they think are going to fit their organization long term. I do think this is a pretty good draft class. I don't think it's a weak one. There's 2 absolute stars, but there's depth to be found throughout the rest of the lottery and parts of the first round. I also think that there's a lot of eyes on next year's draft by the league executives as being a potentially weak one, or at least one that doesn't have a top tier star or 2 or 3 or 4. And the result of that is a lot of times teams make those moves on draft day in order to acquire some future assets in general. And I don't think the 2024 draft is predictably strong enough to want to trade into a lottery pick in next year's draft right now. So it just takes away another one of the mechanisms that a team would utilize to slide up or down that board.
Do you think if they move the draft to after free agency, or the free agency before the draft, however you want to frame it, that would be more conducive to draft movement on actual draft night, or would it be more prohibitive?
I think it would be conducive to more, but it's probably not a good thing for the league long term because it kind of devalues the draft picks in some regard. I think that if you discard them away because you need to make different salary cap maneuvers in order to get this rumored guy that's still available, it just ends up making these young guys and the value of draft picks kind of skyrocket down the board. And that's not a good thing for the NBA. They want to protect the draft as an entire entity. So I think it's probably good where it's at.
I'm with you there, by the way. I don't think they should change it. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people do. Our final question comes from the big fella. Looking back at the Kings taking Keegan Murray over Jaden Ivey, I think you look at that pick as a win and probably the right choice. How do you think the way that turned up will impact teams' decisions this year, if at all? And what team should maybe try to make more of a win now over potential with their pick?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a win now move, but I think what Keegan has done is shown the importance of adding the right high end role player, like fourth or fifth starter, to a team that's ready to burst. That's the value here. And if there's one that I would circle in this lottery area, or really, I'll go two teams that I would circle. It's Detroit at 5 and Indiana at 7. And that's continually why guys like Jarace Walker and Taylor Hendricks kind of show up here is the right role player who brings everything together really can help tie Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey in a half-court offense with Jalen Duren and the right big men in there together. That the right four-man in Indiana can allow Miles Turner, Tyrese Halliburton, and the litany of floor spacing they have to just let them become a playoff team sooner than later. So it doesn't go back to the fit versus best player available conversation we had earlier necessarily, but I do think that there is value in just going with the guy you know is going to help tie those pieces together.
Before I ask you about how your lottery mock would shake out, is there anything in this draft I didn't ask you about that you think we should discuss?
We hit on a lot of the top prospects. I think a couple other names to mention. I'll go with one last one here. Bilal Coulibaly for Metropolitans, teammate of Victor Wembanyama's, starting to skyrocket up draft boards in a lot of different ways. And that's based both off of kind of different analysts seeing the upside in him now and putting him in the lottery grade, as well as the rumors that are out there that he may have a lottery promise. Just an athletic freak, 18-year-old from France, really raw game right now, shows so many flashes on the defensive end of the floor, and is starting to get some on-ball creation reps as a teenager playing in the French League playoffs. That's so rare. And people are trying to, with only 3 weeks left of the draft, make sense of what all that means. It's really challenging to do, but he's a name that is just starting to creep into that higher end conversation now.
So you think there's a real chance then, like there's validity to the reporting that he might have a lottery promise?
I think there's, from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, there's some real buzz around it.
That is pretty incredible. And because where was he being, if we were to rewind 2 months ago? Where was he being like mocked around, or where was he on big boards?
Yeah, I think he probably in a lot of places would have been a late first round, high upside draft and stash investment, or a guy that just goes back to France next year and prepares for the 2024 NBA draft, trying to be a top 10 pick then.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a 2023 NBA mock draft for just the lottery. I'm just going to give you the team, and I just want to know who you would take. And so we're going to begin the biggest mystery of all, the San Antonio Spurs at number 1.
Oh, boy. Tough one for me, but with the first overall pick, San Antonio Spurs select Victor Wembanyama.
The Hornets at number 2.
I'm going best player available and a guy I absolutely buy into, Scoot Henderson.
The Blazers at number 3.
I think Portland probably goes Brandon Miller here. That to me seems like the right fit.
The Rockets at number 4.
Big Amen Thompson guy. Love the long-term upside. I'd love to see him and Jalen Green together in Houston in that backcourt long-term.
The Detroit Pistons at number 5.
This is what we just talked about here, which is prioritizing the right guy to tie everything together. Jarace Walker from Houston goes to the Detroit Pistons. Just a really solid team defender who has a lot more skill than he was able to show in his 1 year in college on the offensive end.
The Orlando Magic at number 6.
Going high upside swing. Cam Whitmore from Villanova, just another athletic paint touch guy who you cannot keep out of lane. Unbelievably untapped upside for him. I'd love to see in a couple years what he, Paolo Banchero, and Franz Wagner look like together.
The Indiana Pacers at number 7.
Your boy, Taylor Hendricks. It's the right fit for the team there. Length on the defensive end of the floor, still young enough in their team building trajectory that they can allow him to try to tap into different things offensively if they see that upside in him.
The Wizards at number 8.
I think Ausar Thompson is going to be the guy that is most likely to go here. 8 and 9 here, and these are back-to-back picks with Washington and then Utah on the clock. Like Ausar Thompson and Anthony Black, it's really a pick your poison there. I'm a big Anthony Black fan, but both of them are high processing lead guards, so to speak, who make good plays with ball in their hands, don't shoot it really well right now, but could also be connective players with how they defend. Like very similar kind of profiles. I just buy into Anthony Black a hell of a lot more as an intangibles guy.
So Anthony Black to the Jazz at number 9.
Anthony Black to the Jazz at number 9.
Congratulations to Utah on winning the NBA draft. The Mavericks at number 10.
Derek Lively, the big man out of Duke. I think it's still a little bit underrated how much of an impact he is having as a rim protector. The final 8 weeks of the basketball season for him as a freshman were on par with the elite NBA rim protectors that they've turned into. Dallas needs help on defense. I think it's okay that he's not on the floor late games because he's kind of a rim-bound center, but just a legitimate defensive anchor.
The Orlando Magic at number 11.
After taking best player available earlier with Cam Whitmore, they need some shooting and floor spacing badly, going with Gradey Dick out of Kansas.
OKC Thunder at number 12.
The Thunder like to go with these high character, high work ethic, but positionally long and skilled with the ball in their hands players. Leonard Miller from the G League Ignite definitely fits that mold. He can help them be a unique front court partner for Chet Holmgren long term. He just strikes me as a Thundery guy.
The Toronto Raptors at number 13.
Here's where I'll go. Bilal Coulibaly out of Metropolitans just seems like he's trending in that direction right now. Masai Ujiri has not been unwilling to take swings on international prospects and these raw athletic wings before. I'd be really curious to see what he and Scotty Barnes look like together on defense long term.
And finally, the Pelicans at number 14.
My boy Kobi Bufkin going here. I think that in New Orleans, they need to continue to thread the needle between guys who can play on ball and off ball next to a Zion Williamson type of core. They need a little bit more rim pressure. Bufkin shot 70% at the rim this year as a 6'4" guard. He's also a very good shooter from beyond the range. And yeah, he's got some length to him on the defensive end too. Very Pelican-y type of player here at 14.
Here's hoping Kelsey from Discord's a Pelicans fan then, since they wanted to see some more top 15 love for Kobi Bufkin. Spins, this was great. Are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you put out?
I am so able, and I am happy to do so. Anyone out there who wants to find more draft coverage that I put out, go to my Twitter page at @theboxin1_. It links to where I have all of my other work. You can find me on YouTube with my name, Adam Spinella. A lot of scouting reports, mock drafts, and big boards over there. And then on my Substack page, theboxin1.substack.com, I have the written companions that go with those videos, put them into context a little bit more and talk about where I project all these players out to be. So great resource for people as we're about 2 weeks away from the draft here. Can't believe that the end is coming, but I am eyeing that finish line so I can get some fucking sleep.
The link to that, Spins' Substack, will be in the podcast and YouTube description. So go click on it, subscribe, consume all of that fantastic work. Spins, thank you as always. I am elated that in a few weeks' time you will be able to get some sleep, and I hope you were able to steal some, obviously, in between now and then. I will be talking to you very, very soon.